Well, thank you very much, Joe, and especially thank you to NFID. I'm deeply honored by this distinction. I'd also like to thank the fact that my family, or at least many of my family, are with me this evening. And so if you indulge me, let me just introduce them. There's my wife, Mary, my daughter, Liz, and her husband, John, my son, Jason, his wife, Rachel, who are expecting in September, so little Zoe as well is here. My sister, Donna, and her husband, David. So it's very special to have them with us. And there's two others that were with us a little bit earlier. Now, many of you may have seen them during the photograph session. Our granddaughters, the daughters of Liz and John, Emmy and Sarah, who are ages 2 and 5, who were running around quite a bit then, and hopefully they're up at their room quieting down at this time. But anyway, talking about names, I just want to mention that I had the privilege of knowing John Utes and meeting him several times. The first time actually was in the fall of 1975 when I was just a first-year fellow in infectious disease at Ohio State, and he came there to participate in the symposium. And as many of you are aware, he was quite an expert in systemic fungal infections. And as a sort of inexperienced ID fellow, it was quite exciting just to hear his wisdom and the pearls that he presented. And then subsequently, obviously, to realize the leadership that he provided, not only in our specialty, but obviously in the foundation, as Joe already mentioned. So it was really a great honor for me to receive it in his name. I also want to comment that over the last 40 years of my clinical practice, we've seen lots of changes in infectious disease, lots of new infections, lots of emerging infections. Obviously, HIV is one. But I can remember the first ICAC, which is the sort of our international, or at least inter-science national conference that we would have in infectious diseases. The first one I went to in 1976. You know, at that time, the main concern was that they identified a strain of gonococcus that was resistant to penicillin. Now, we know that there's been many new agents that have been available since that time that have been very effective against gonococcus. But sadly today, there are many infections due to that organism for which there is no monotherapy agent effective. And so this really brings up the importance of antimicrobial stewardship. And I'm so proud and glad that NFID is sponsoring, or at least co-jointly with MAD-ID symposium that actually was just convened last week, and I participated in that, to promote appropriate antimicrobial stewardship. And I certainly encourage the foundation to continue that relationship, because I think it's extremely helpful as we go through our appropriate use of antimicrobial therapy. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, I just wanted to quote here the vision of NFID, because I think it's important for how we consider the importance of this foundation. But it is for healthier lives through effective prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of infectious diseases. Now, Marla mentioned that earlier in her introduction. But despite what was considered 50 years ago, that it's time to close the books on infectious diseases, obviously we know that that has not happened. And obviously the mission for the foundation, and that is to increase education and awareness across the whole lifespan of infectious diseases, is even more important now than it was then. And lastly, let me just say, the importance of this foundation was made very clear to me during my presidency, as it is, because it was then that we had to develop a search for a new executive director. And as we sent out applications for, or at least requests for applications, we were overwhelmed by numbers of highly qualified applicants. I mean, I think it was over 80 that presented to us, and we looked over all of these. I want to thank Bill Schaffner and Pat Joseph for their help with this during this process. But as it turns out, we didn't have to look far, because we were able to find an extremely well-qualified candidate within our own ranks. And of course, that is Marla, who now is the executive director. And I want to thank her for her excellent leadership since becoming executive director. So thank you very much, Marla. So in the end, let me just say thank you very much. This is quite an honor, very much appreciated, and I wish everybody a happy evening. Thank you.